I still remember the exact feeling of that Tuesday morning. The way the sun came through the kitchen window, the coffee smell, the ordinary quiet of a life I thought was solid. And I remember thinking, not for the first time, but for what I now know was the last time, that I was one of the lucky ones. Some people spend their whole lives searching for what I thought I had. A good man, a real partnership, a home that felt like safety. I had built something, or at least I believed I had. And I held onto that belief the way you hold onto something warm when it's cold outside. You don't question it, you just hold. But here's what nobody tells you. The things that break you open, they don't come with warnings. They don't announce themselves. They look exactly like a Tuesday morning, exactly like a phone left on the kitchen counter, exactly like an innocent tap of your thumb on a screen that was never meant for your eyes. My name is Claire. I was 41 years old when my world changed. Married for 13 years to a man named Daniel. We had a house in a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. 2 dogs, a golden retriever named Biscuit, and a scraggly little terrier mix we called Lou. We had a daughter, Mia, who was 9 and obsessed with soccer and strawberry ice cream. We had a life. A real, textured, breathing life. Daniel and I met in our late 20s at a mutual friend's barbecue. He was funny, not the loud kind of funny, but the kind that snuck up on you. He had this way of making you feel like the most interesting person in the room. I fell for that fast. Most women do, I think. When someone looks at you like you're worth really looking at, you tend to move toward them. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We got married on a September afternoon with 60 people we loved, and a cake that was 1 layer too short but tasted perfect. That's the version of Daniel I knew. That's the version I kept in my chest like a photograph. For most of our marriage, things were genuinely good. Not movie good, real life good, which means complicated and sometimes exhausting, but underneath all of it stable. We argued about money sometimes. We went through a rough patch when Mia was a baby and neither of us was sleeping. We had seasons of distance like most couples do, but we always came back to each other. At least I thought we did. Daniel worked in logistics. He managed contracts for a mid-sized shipping company. He traveled maybe 4 or 5 times a year, nothing excessive. I worked part-time as an elementary school librarian and spent the rest of my time being Mia's mom, which felt like a full-time job on its own. We weren't a glamorous couple. We were just us. And for a long time, us felt like enough. Looking back now, I can see the cracks. I can trace them backward through the months like a road map I didn't know I was reading. But in the moment, they each had perfectly reasonable explanations. That's what makes betrayal so cruel. It disguises itself as everyday life. It started maybe 8 months before everything fell apart. Small things. Daniel started keeping his phone face down on the table when we watched TV at night. I noticed it but didn't say anything. I told myself it was just a new habit. Maybe the screen brightness was bothering him. I genuinely believed that. Then there were the late nights. He'd always been someone who went to bed by 10. Suddenly he was staying up past midnight saying he was catching up on work emails. The first few times I'd walk downstairs and he'd close his laptop quickly, and when I asked what he was working on, he'd wave it off with something vague. I told myself he was stressed. His company had gone through a restructure. I gave him the benefit of every doubt I had. He became a little more distant too. Not dramatically. He didn't stop being kind to me. He still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still remembered to pick up the right brand of orange juice. But there was a glass wall between us that hadn't been there before. Something in his eyes had changed. When I looked at him across the dinner table, I felt like I was looking at someone who was thinking about somewhere else entirely. I brought it up once gently, said I felt like we'd been disconnected lately. He got a little defensive, said I was imagining it. That work was just hard right now, that he loved me. He held my hand across the table and looked right at me, and I believed him. I wanted to believe him. There is a difference between those two things, and I understand that now. But in that moment, they felt the same. There was one moment about 4 months before the end that should have told me something. We were at Mia's soccer game and Daniel's phone buzzed. He picked it up, read something, and his face changed, just for a second. This micro-expression crossed over him, something almost like guilt or fear, and then it was gone and he was milling again, cheering for Mia. I almost asked what the text was, almost. I looked away instead. I turned back to the field and I told myself I'd imagined it. I was good at that. Imagining away the things that scared me. The week it happened, Daniel was in a better mood than he'd been in months. That sounds strange, I know, but he was lighter, more present. He took Mia to her practice on Thursday and came back laughing, this real full laugh I hadn't heard from him in a while. He made dinner that Friday night, pasta from scratch, which he only did on special occasions. He poured wine and we sat at the table long after Mia had gone upstairs, and he talked and I talked, and for a few hours it felt like the version of our marriage I held closest in my memory. I actually thought that whatever rough patch we'd been in was ending. I thought he was coming back to me. I told my best friend Jonna that weekend that I felt hopeful for the first time in a while. She smiled at me over her coffee cup and said she was glad, and I meant every word of it. Sunday morning, I woke up early. Daniel was still asleep. I went downstairs to let the dogs out, put the coffee on, and reached for my phone on the counter to check the time. His phone was there instead of mine. We had the same phone case, both black, both slightly scuffed on the corner. We'd mixed them up before. I picked it up without thinking, tapped the screen to check the time, and it lit up. He hadn't locked it, and what I saw in that one unintended second, one notification, sitting right there on the screen, visible before I could even look away, stopped my whole world. The notification was from a messaging app I recognized, but that neither of us used. The preview showed the first line of a message, just a few words. Her name, a name I didn't know, and then a sentence that no wife should ever read about her husband. I stood in my kitchen with a dog circling my feet, and I read those words 3 times. Then I stood very still for what felt like a full minute, but was probably 10 seconds. My brain was doing this thing where it was trying to find another interpretation, another meaning, some angle from which that message could mean something innocent. But there wasn't one. There was no version of those words that wasn't exactly what they appeared to be. My hands were shaking. I noticed that almost clinically, like I was watching myself from across the room. I scrolled up. I know I shouldn't have, maybe, but I did, and what I found went back months. There were hundreds of messages, photographs, plans made, inside jokes, a whole language that 2 people build when they're close, and every single word of it was between my husband and a woman named Kara. She wasn't a stranger to him. From what I pieced together in those terrible 15 minutes standing in my own kitchen, she was someone he'd reconnected with, someone from before us, someone he'd apparently never fully let go of. And somewhere in the past last year, what had apparently been a friendship had become something else entirely. Something that had its own rhythm, its own intimacy, its own future being quietly discussed without me. There were messages about her visiting cities where he traveled for work. There were messages that made it clear they had seen each other more than once. There were messages where he talked about his life, our life, in a way that made my stomach turn. Not cruelly. That almost would have been easier. He talked about me like I was a responsibility, like I was the life he had and she was the life he wanted. He never said those words exactly. He didn't have to. I put the phone down on the counter face up. I went to the back door and let the dogs out into the yard. I stood at the window and watched Lou chase a squirrel he had absolutely no chance of catching, and I felt something inside me that I can only describe as a slow collapse. Not explosion, not fire. A slow, quiet crumbling of something that had taken 13 years to build. I didn't cry right away. I think I was too shocked for tears. Grief has stages, everyone knows that, but what nobody tells you is that the very first one is silence. This hollow, ringing silence in your own chest where something used to be. I sat down at the kitchen table. The coffee was still dripping into the pot. Everything around me was exactly the same as it had been 20 minutes ago, and I was completely different. I thought about Mia asleep upstairs in her soccer poster bedroom. I thought about the pasta dinner on Friday, the wine, the laughter, the way he had looked at me over the table and made me feel hopeful. And I understood, with a clarity that was almost unbearable, that he'd probably just gotten off the phone with her that afternoon. That the lightness I'd mistaken for him returning to me was something else. Something I didn't want to name. The tears came then, quietly at first and then not quietly at a LL. I sat at that table and I cried in a way I haven't cried since I was a child. That ugly, total kind of crying where you're not trying to manage it or hide it. You're just in it completely. I pressed my face into my hands and I let myself fall apart for those few minutes before my daughter woke up. I gave myself that much. At some point I heard the floorboards upstairs, Mia moving around, and something in me went still and quiet and functional the way mothers do. You don't get to stay in the broken place when there's a child in the house. You stand up, you wipe your face, you pour the coffee, you become the stable thing because you have to be, even when nothing is stable at all. By the time Mia came downstairs in her pajamas asking for waffles, I was standing at the counter looking like a person who was fine. I made her waffles. I watched her eat. I listened to her talk about a goal she'd scored in practice, and I nodded and smiled, and not one part of me was in that kitchen. I was still standing at the back window watching the dog chase the squirrel, feeling the world fall apart under my feet. Daniel came downstairs around 9. He was in a good mood. He kissed the top of Mia's head. He poured himself coffee. He asked what my plans were for the day with this easy, open smile on his face that I now understood completely differently than I ever had before. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I said nothing. I needed time. I needed to be certain of what I knew and what I felt before I said a single word, because once I said it, everything would change. And some part of me, the part that had loved this man for 15 years, was still in grief for what I was about to do. Not regret, just grief. There is a difference. That afternoon, while he took Mia to her friend's house, I called Jonna. I told her everything. She didn't say anything for a long time after I finished, and then she said, "Claire, I'm so sorry." She didn't try to explain it or rationalize it or ask what I might have done wrong. She just said she was sorry. That was exactly what I needed. I love her for that. I spent that evening going through things I needed to understand, not to build a case, but to understand the shape of what had happened. How long? How serious? Whether this was something he was trying to end or something he was trying to protect. And the more I understood, the clearer it became. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a sustained, deliberate choice he had made over and over again for almost a year. Every dinner, every kiss goodbye, every late night on his laptop. He had known exactly what he was doing while I had known nothing. I waited until Monday evening. Mia was at my mother's house. I had asked her to take her for the night without explaining why, and my mom, who has always known when not to ask questions, just said okay. I made dinner. I know that sounds strange. I made dinner and I set the table and I let him sit down across from me. And when he looked up and started to say something about his day, I put his phone on the table between us. He went pale. It happened in 1 second. Whatever easy thing he was about to say just evaporated off his face, and what was left underneath was something I hadn't seen before. Fear. And beneath the fear, something worse, recognition. He didn't try to deny it. He didn't look at the phone and ask what I meant or play confused. He just looked at me and his eyes filled and he said my name. I asked him one question. I asked him if he loved her. He didn't answer for a long time. And then he said he didn't know. And those 3 words, those quiet, terrible, honest words, told me everything the messages hadn't. I don't need to tell you every word of that conversation. Some of it was loud and some of it was quiet, and all of it hurt in ways I didn't know hurt was capable of reaching. He told me he was sorry. He told me things had felt stagnant between us and that he hadn't handled it the right way. He talked about feeling unseen and disconnected. And I listened. I really listened. Because I am someone who believes in understanding even when it's hard. And I tried to hold the reality that human beings are complicated and people make terrible choices when they're lost. But there is a place where understanding ends and self-respect begins. And I had found that place. I told him I needed him to leave. Not forever, not legally, not that night. But I needed him out of our house while I figured out how to breathe. He didn't argue. He went upstairs and packed a bag, and I sat in the kitchen listening to the sounds of it. And it was one of the loneliest sounds I have ever heard. When he came downstairs with a bag over his shoulder, he stood in the kitchen doorway and he looked at me for a long moment. He looked like someone who had finally understood what they'd done, but understood it too late. And I looked back at him, at this man I had loved so thoroughly for long, and I felt something settle in me. Not peace exactly, but ground. Solid ground under my feet, maybe for the first time in months. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. I won't dress that up. Some mornings I woke up, and for one merciful half-second before my brain caught up, I didn't remember. And then I remembered, and the weight of it would come back down. Telling Mia was the hardest conversation I have ever had. I kept it simple that Daddy and I were going through a hard time, and he was going to stay somewhere else for a while. She cried. I held her, and I told her that both of us loved her more than anything in the world, and that would never change. I believed that completely. I still do. Whatever Daniel did to me, he is a devoted father. I have never let my own hurt cloud that. I went to therapy. That is maybe the single best decision I made in all of it. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Ellison who has kind eyes and a very direct way of speaking, helped me sit with the grief without trying to rush it. She helped me see that the question of whether to stay or go wasn't something I had to answer in the first month or even the first 3 months. She helped me figure out what I actually wanted, separate from guilt, separate from fear, separate from what I thought I was supposed to want. Daniel and I went to couples counseling for about 4 months. I want to be honest about that because I know some people will wonder. We tried. He was remorseful, genuinely, I believe. He ended all contact with Kara. He answered every question I asked him, even when the answers hurt. He was willing to do the work. But there is a specific kind of trust, the kind that lives in your bones, and once it breaks, it doesn't repair on a schedule. Some nights I would look at him across the room and I would feel love, real love, and then the image of those messages would flash through me and the love would just curdle. Not from anger, from grief. I grieved the marriage I thought I had. And eventually I understood that I was grieving something that in some ways had never been exactly what I believed it was. That was not easy to sit with. It is still not easy. Daniel and I separated formally after about 6 months. It was not explosive or hateful. It was two people who had loved each other genuinely, who had built something real, who had also failed each other in different ways, deciding to let go with as much dignity as they could manage. We still sit together at Mia's soccer games. We still co-parent with care. There are moments even now when I look at him and remember the man at the barbecue who made me feel like the most interesting person in the room. I don't hate those memories. I'm not sure I ever will. What I didn't expect was what came after. Not the pain, I expected the pain. But the other thing, the strange, quiet, unexpected opening that happens when you've lost something you thought you could never survive losing, and you realize that you are surviving it. Every single day, surviving it. I started to know myself differently. I realized how much of the last few years I had spent managing my own perception, smoothing over the glass wall, telling myself I was imagining the distance, tamping down the instincts that were trying to tell me something was wrong. I had been so committed to the story of my marriage being good that I had abandoned my own knowing. I trust my instincts now. Not in a fearful way. I didn't come out of this suspicious and guarded, though I understand why some people do. I came out of it more honest, with myself first. That is the change I'm most grateful for, as strange as it sounds to feel grateful for anything that came from this. I am 42 years old now. I live in the same house. Biscuit is still golden and ridiculous, and Lou is still chasing squirrels he will never catch. Mia scored 3 goals last Saturday, and the sound she made when that third one went in, that pure, unself-conscious sound of a child's joy, is the sound that makes all of this survivable. I'm not the same woman who stood at that kitchen counter with the wrong phone in her hand. I'm not more broken than her. I think in the ways that count, I might be more if you are somewhere in the middle of something like this right now, if you are the one standing at the counter, or lying awake, or making waffles you can barely see through because your eyes are so full. I want you to know that the ground comes back. It doesn't come back the way it was. It comes back different, and for a long time different feels like loss. But if you stay with it, if you stay honest, if you let yourself grieve the thing you thought you had without collapsing into bitterness, different starts to feel like something else. It starts to feel like yours. I still believe in love. I still believe that two people can build something real and lasting. I believe it more carefully now and more honestly, but I do believe it. What I no longer believe is that love is enough on its own. That if you love someone enough and hold tight enough and look away from the right things, everything will be fine. Love needs honesty to survive. It needs the courage to say the hard thing and hear the hard thing. It needs two people who are willing to look at each other, really look, without a glass wall in between. I had that once, or I thought I did, and now I know exactly what to look for. Take care of yourself. Don't look away from your own knowing. And if someone shows you something you don't want to see, trust what you see. Because a Tuesday morning can change everything. And the life you build after it, the one that's entirely, honestly, finally yours, might just be the one you were always meant to be living.